Today, I'm planning to start a web API. So to create a web API, let's start a fresh project. So here we have a ASP.NET Core Web API project template. We'll select this one and we'll press next. And we'll provide a proper name for this one. So let's say our web API and move to next. In the next section, we not need anything for HTTPS for now. And we are going to create a web API with controllers. We have another option for minimal API, so we'll learn about the minimal API later. With that, let's move on for the next. We are using .NET 6.0. Let's create a new project. So basically, this will do the creation for the project for web API. So we have our Visual Studio over here. And we can see we have a folder structure. Very similar to our MVC application. Actually, it's an MVC application, but with a few files, like we not have a model, and we have only controllers, and we have one sample API already given in terms of model. So we have one simple example for weather forecast, and we have one dummy controller as well. That is an example to show us how we can create a web API inside the ASP.NET Core 6.0. So as soon as you create a project, you will get this file, you can read them. But in place of using them, we will create our own so that we will learn. But before adding anything, let's run it first time so that we can check everything is okay. Sometime due to some problems, some packages are not restored, then we may get the problem. But as it is running, so I hope everything will be fine. So as soon as we run web API project, we get this kind of UI. That is the help of Swagger. Swagger is something that will provide us a documentation part of the web API that will help us to test and check our API, because there is only 2 or 3 ways to check the API. One is with the help of Swagger or similar tools, and one is with the help of uh, tool like a Postman or SOAP UI. There are few tools that allows us to check the API. The third one is like we will have uh, we have to call our API from our application in terms of Ajax, or some way we have to call the API and then only we can test it. But thanks to Swagger, it provides a very neat and clean. So without writing anything, as we had created the sample weather forecast API in the project, so we can see that we have a one API over here. So when we click, we can see what are the things that we can do with this API. So this one is the schema that it will return after the success. So if we want to check that, if we will press try it out and we say execute, it will basically call that function and return some result as well. So you can see we have some sample data that is coming from that auto generated class. So we have that. So how to create this kind of API? Let's try to do that. So how to create a web API inside our Visual Studio? We created a project till now. So with that, we are good to go. Starting the development for the web API. So from where to start? Actually, there are many ways to do that, but Let's start with the very basic. So first we'll check this program.cs. So this is the very similar program.cs that we used in ASP.NET MVC application. Here we have a builder and we have our middlewares we can inject. So we can use our existing models that we created previously, or we can do everything from scratch. So let's do everything from scratch so that we learn. Do not get confused with the lengthy process. Actually, I want to show you everything from scratch so that you can learn well. So what we do, we'll create one folder. We'll say add new folder. And we will say models. So we added one folder and we can create one model. Let's add a class inside the model. Basically, what is model? It's a class. So I want to create a class with the name of issue. So we have one class in the name of issue, and I will add few properties so that we can use them. So I will copy paste to save the time. Here you can see I had created a few properties: ID, title, description, and priority as a enum, and issue type as a enum. And priority we have a low, medium, high, and issue type is a feature, bug, documentation, etc. With that, our model is complete, and this one is for the validation. We'll have say the required part. So this is what we need to create in model. So after finishing the model creation, we need to have a database context in order to use the entity framework, or in place of entity framework, we can use our own one. But for today demo, I am planning to use the entity framework so that the code will be a little bit smaller. So let's add one folder. We'll say data. Add new folder and we will say data. Inside the data, let's add a class. So first time when we tried with the entity framework, we had asked with the entity framework to add all these, but this time we are creating them manually. So I am creating a issue DB context as a class. And in this DB context, what I want to do, I want to inherit DB context. But to inherit the DB context, what we need? We need to reference a package. So let's open our package manager console and install entity framework. So we need a entity framework core.sql server as we are using the SQL server. So let's wait to have this one. So entity framework core SQL server, we need this one. So let's install this one. We installed entity framework, and then we need a entity framework core tools. So let's finish first this one. As it is installed, the entity framework core tools, we need this one. Always remember both need to be a same version, 6.0.9. So we installed our entity framework package so that we can use them. With that, we are good to inherit our DB context. So as soon as you return it, already knowing that we need to have a package Microsoft.entity framework.core, and with that we need to create a constructor so that we can do something with that. So it's a public, and we'll say DB context options, and then we'll pass our issue DB context over here, and then we'll say options, and with that we need to use as a base, and we pass options. So this is our constructor, and now we have to inject our issue class. So we'll say db set, and db set will pass our issue class. Always remember, I am just want to show you how to use our entity framework issue of ISSUE issue, and then we will say issues and get and set. So basically this is now complete. With that, we need to configure our program.cs so that we can pass a connection string. So we need to create a connection string inside our application.json file. So let me copy paste from somewhere connection string so that we can do quickly. And I'll paste over here, and I will say API live class live demo. Yeah, this is the name that I want to run. And then inside the program.cs, we need to add a context so that it can read a connection string before the builder. What we say builder.add context. So this is our class name, and we'll say this is the lambda. That is why I tried to teach you yesterday. Everywhere we are using lambda. So we'll say use SQL Server, and we are reading the configuration file which have a name SQL Server, and this is the name of our connection string. Whatever name you have, let's say I will say my SQL Server connection string. So you can save this one over here. You might have to just write what is written over here. You can just name anything, but that is must be over here, and you have to read from that value. So in this way, we injected the connection string. Now this part is done. Now we completed the injection part. We had completed the issue DB context part. So everything is okay for now. Now what we need? We need to open our package manager console so that we can run the migration. So this one is something that help us to run our migration. So what is the command that we need to run for it? Let me find out it. Package manager console. Install it and then add migration, and then we have to provide a name, add to DB, and the path is like inside the data. So this is the need to pass. Let's see. Cannot be found mismatch parameter. The command is we'll say add migration, create data base -o, and we'll say data/migrations. So this one will do the job for adding the migration. So the migration is ready, and then we can say update to DB. So we'll say update database. With that, it will do the job. And we can check this one. Inside the SSMS. So to confirm that, let's open our SSMS. So in our SSMS, we have a database. API demo live class, and here we have a table that we need. This one is for the entity framework migration, and we can see the columns. But currently we have a no data. Currently we have a no data. Okay, so we created everything. Now, after this, we will start actually build a web API. So to build a web API, what we do? We have to add a controller. So where we add controller? Inside the controller. So let's add one controller. Inside this controller, we'll say add controller, and We'll select this API part and we will use MPT controller and we will say add. So here we will say, as we are creating for the issue, so we'll say issue controller.cs. With that, we will get this structure of the controller. Here you can see we have an API controller as a, and we have a route. So everything we have in API slash and controller name that we can invoke it. Basically, this is the way how we create a web API. This can be taken into a controller level or we can say action level too. But for now, as we are creating web API, so we'll make it a controller level. So with that, let's create our first API, and which is very simple. So in order to use the entity framework data, we can have a private read only, and we will say issue and DB context, and we will create a context. And then we need to have a constructor. And as you guys know the lambda, so today I will use a lambda for the constructor. So this is one liner. In place of curly braces, we done the initialization with the lambda. So this is the one way, or we can do like this. Yeah. So this one and the previous one are the same actually. There is nothing to do. Now let's create a one GET request. So I want a HTTP GET. Then I will say I need to public, and then I want to return async, and then I will say task, and I action result, and with that what we can do. Actually, this is not our MVC one. This is for web API. So we'll return I enumerable because we have to return the data. I enumerable of type our issue class. So this is our issue class. So we will return a task, which is list of issue, and then you can provide any name. For now, I'll use a get, or you can say get issues. ISS issues, whatever name you prefer, and then we'll say return what await, and then we'll say underscore context dot issues dot to async to list of async, because we need all the issues that we have. And we can write this one with lambda. In place of writing all these mumbo jumbo, what we can do like this. And as we have not a much more thing, we can do like this here. Actually, both are same thing. Now, let's run it. Though we have no data, but we can check at least our endpoint is working or not. So whatever the actions we create in API, will say endpoint. We can see we have one new endpoint, and if we do want to check the detail, so this will return all those things. If we try to execute, and if we try it out, we'll get no data actually, because we have nothing inside the table. So basically it will return a blank. We have nothing to output for now. So this is the very simple GET request that is created as a web API, GET method. Very similar to that. We can decorate it with a few things like if there is something data return 200, and if there is no data return like a status 404 not found. So these are the response type that you can add if you want to show your caller that with the proper messages. So if it goes success, it will return 200, but if there is no data, it will return 404 like something not found. So these are the way that you can decorate your API. Very similar to that, we can create a GET request. So basically this is very simple, very similar to above. We will add a GET and we'll say ID, and we'll create everything like over here, and there's a GET ID. So with the entity framework, we'll get the data by ID, and we'll say return issue. If null, then say not found. Otherwise, return the issue and status is okay. If it's okay, then status code will be 200. So in this way, you can implement a GET request. And if you want to add a data, so very similar to the above one, we can add another action controller, which look like this. So we'll say task action result create, and we'll pass that issue from our API, and then we'll add that, and we'll ask entity framework to save inside the database. And after that, what we can say, we can create an action get by ID so that it will list the added data. So this one will add inside the database. This one will call the get by ID method, and it will return our data in terms of issue, and we are supplying the ID which is just inserted inside the database. So this is the way. Let's run it and try to add one data so that we can check our all the endpoints. So this time we'll get like we have a few things. So this one is for the post. So if I want to try it out, then it will provide me to add a value. How to add? Let's say I want to add value to DB. This is my title, and this is the DTL for the task, whatever you need. And we'll say priority as it is enum. So I will say priority is 2, and it's an issue. Let's assign a 1, and these are the date. So in this is the JSON formatting of the data that we are passing. So after that, if you say execute, after the execution, you will get some response. So it says that we called it, and its status code is something 201, and it's returning the data which is just inserted inside the database. And to confirm that, if you go and run this query, you will have one record inside the database. So we inserted the data inside the table with the help of this post method and generated UI with the Swagger. This same API we can call. Let's say we have a get issue and we have a parameter. Which one have a parameter by ID? Let's find that. So in place of calling everything, we have a get by ID. So we'll try it out. So in the ID field, I will say 1, and if I will say execute, it will return the first record from the database, and that we just inserted. So this is the way you can create other like for edit and delete. So as you know how to create get and post method, so you can create any type of API. So this is all that I plan to guide you today.